2 acres. So it shrank, and we're on, of course, the eastern side, and a lot of these buildings along the way were put up around 1826. In other words, people bought lots. And so that started the shrinkage, although that was, the second. So we may someday end up going to the north end, but we're going to just catch the south end of the common on the end of our walk. And what I'm sort of trying to do today is you can get some nice information from something that we put together here, the bicentennial, and copy that. And then we have a historic preservation survey back in 1983. And it has a lot of material about the architecture of all these buildings and what they are and how old they are, with a little bit of comment about who lived there, why it's important. But my purpose tonight is to start here and just go down 4 buildings, 4 homes, and get down towards the cemetery area and focus on special families who had special stories to tell, and in fact left us with things like diaries and books they've written and so on and so forth. The Historical Society has all the tangible, pictures and books and all that sort of stuff out on display. We can't do it here, which is a little awkward, but we'll try and give you a better insight on some of the families that you might not know about who lived here at some point in the past. And of course, if you have a question and we're not answering it, please let me know, and we'll see if we can come up with an answer. I called it Tragedy Road, and I don't think, after I got started here, there is a section of road, with homes this long or this short that has more tales to tell about tragedies and just weird happenings, with the families that lived here long ago, and you'll get the idea very shortly here. This, of course, is North House, and once upon a time it was called Clap House. And when Sterling bought this, they were happy to change the name. And we'll leave it at that. Everybody's healthy there and have been healthy for years. But this building with its carriage house and the barn was erected, as was that over there on the corner, by one family named Stevens. And there are 3 generations of Stevens who lived in this house at certain times, starting in probably 1815 or 20 or so. So what I'll be mentioning are the names of these people and what they've done for us.
So Stevens built it.
Stevens, this house, it wasn't built by Stevens, and if you get into the nitty-gritty here, it was built by a man who was well known as a really good carpenter, and I think you'd agree that it has something special about it. A lot of nice, wood,
inside,
and
nice
ironically, I think they list this as older than some of our other buildings that we're going to be going by. 1820, they presumed, the original. And as things get changed and added to, certainly. But and I can't tell you the name of the builder, but he was famous around here long ago. James Wellington Stevens. It's weird. He lived from 1815 to 1870, and he was the first one on this site. And we owe him a debt of gratitude in that he was a photographer. And we're in the process of going through our glass plate negatives, of which we have a lot. Many of them are rather small. And the older ones are the bigger ones. And James Wellington Stevens was the presumed photographer of these old glass plates. And if we had them all laid out here, there'd be about 18 or 20 or so. And you'd recognize a lot of the buildings on the Common back about Civil War time. The best I can do is say somewhere around the Civil War, James Wellington Stevens, his hobby, I don't know if he made any money on it, but he took a lot of photographs, and they're fun to look at. And you know, this building shows up in one, and so it goes. So that's the glass plate negatives belong to us. We're trying to find a way to properly store them and preserve them right now with some help from somebody.
And digitize them.
And digitize them. But I think the oldest photos of anything in Craftsbury were done by Miss James Wellington Stevens, who unfortunately died of consumption in 1870. And of course he had children. He had 6 or 7 children. We have photos of some of them as graduates of the old academy. One of them died of consumption, as did her father at some point. Let's see. When you look through the family history of a lot of these old families here, you find out they intermarry so much that they might as well be, first cousins, and they often called each other cousin. Sometimes it was true, sometimes it wasn't, but we've got situations. I'm going to mention somebody down the line here. He married his first cousin, and that was great for him, but it got dicey when problems started in the next generation. So, but he did have enough children to find one of them, Henry Stevens, who was willing to take over the business. And Henry, of all 3 of these people that are Stevenses, he really did an awful lot for expanding his business. He was in a lot of town activities. He was the treasurer and the town clerk for years and years, and I don't think there's anybody, even Samuel Crafts, who had better handwriting, gorgeous handwriting, and that's good to have if you're somebody who has to record deeds and stuff like that.
And the people nowadays appreciate that good handwriting.
Yeah, and that's why I can barely read what I wrote here, unfortunately. But Henry Stevens was here. At some point he took over after his father died, but he lived here until 1938. So it was a long spell of him being town clerk and all that other stuff. He started a business, insurance business, and one of the funky little things we have in the collection is a 3-ring binder, a small one, in which he drew exquisitely detailed illustrations of all the buildings that he insured. And it's become a gold mine if you want to work your way back and say, who lived in the old so-and-so place? And if Henry insured it, we got a good map of what it looked like and sometimes the age of each of the additions, barns and all that. I found a lot of stuff about my wife's family. So Henry lived a long life, and of course he got married, but he and his wife both died in 1938. And then there was the problem, well, who takes over next? Well, there were no male takers of that because there were no children of Henry. So he was childless, and so they got together and they conned somebody from North Dakota. It would be a nephew of all these other people, and they talked Henry Clapp. There's Clapp House. Thanks for the name, Henry. But he was willing to come out from the west and take over the business, such as it was. And this was, of course, his home. And he married, again, into some of the older families. And there's always a connection. You know, you've got Clapps up here on the Canadian border that are related to our Clapps here, believe it or not. So from Fargo, he leaves. He marries a woman from Middle America somewhere named Sarah Elizabeth Jones. And they had 2 children. And one was a woman, and another, of course, was the boy in the family. And his name was Fred, or they called him Freddie. And if we were over there, I could show you the obituary of Freddie. 1955. He didn't graduate from the academy. I don't know where he went. I was surprised not to see his name there. But he's on the monument over here. Because in 1955, the Clapps parents got word that Freddie had been on a training mission in the Southwest, in Texas, I guess. And he blew into a dust storm, and his 33 something or other training thing went down, and he was no more. So he was, unfortunately, his life was rather short. This happened in 1955.
Was that the first tragedy?
That is, I would say, yeah, you know, everybody got consumption in the old days, so thanks for that.
So it's consumption that really caused the big deal.
I know that one. He was, there are a couple of women here in town who remembered Freddie, and he was a very handsome young man. Here he's in the, in the service, and then he's gone. But they remembered Freddie was, he was a goomba sort of thing. But it kind of screwed things up. Henry Clapp, the father, hung on until 1963, and he died of a heart attack, I think. And the widow is the one who's responsible for, sometime shortly after 1963, selling this whole collage to Sterling. And that's why Sterling, do we still own that, Ned? We do. So it's kind of weird, but that sort of ended things for the Clapps and the Stevenses. Since Henry was a town clerk, I used to rummage around in here quite a bit, snooping for stuff. And there was obvious evidence of, I guess you could say there were models for different size caskets up here. There was all sorts of dyes for the work that they did making furniture here also. That was a business as well. And then a little pocket of obvious town records, and that often happens. You know, somebody who's an officer, you're not quite, it's not really important, so you just keep it. And I still remember some of the items I found up there, and I wish I knew where they went, because some of them I'd love to see again. So, let's see, okay. And I'm going to ask, I tried to find something about a headstone. Will Wooten, he found a headstone of some sort.
Oh, in the back there.
In the back. this, of course, he's an undertaker. But Will dug around really hard to find out why it was there. He thought somebody had been murdered and buried. That's probably not the case, but in many instances, for various reasons, a headstone gets separated from, the body, or never gets put where the body is. And I think this is what I heard happened there. I asked the crew over here, the work crew, where it is. It's supposed to be in one of the buildings in Johnson House.
Or did they put it up in that for the Imperial Wall?
I couldn't find it. So now it's a missing headstone. From my perspective anyway. There was no skullduggery or anything there. But they've done a good job trying to keep this going, as we've all tried with buildings. And let's hope it continues. Ned, you have anything relative to your experience here?
No, except this is one of the leakiest basements that you ever want to deal with. And when you try to put modern facilities in these old basements, it was a real effort.
That's where the headstone came up. I
think we're digging around to pull it out of there.
Yeah.
It's fun to explore the house. There's the main stairway, and then there's the back stairway for the servants to use and get up to their bedroom.
Well, it's got some good things to say about it from an architectural standpoint. And I won't read that to you, but you can always check it out yourself. And but I think we better keep walking and head right down next door, luckily.
So you work with her it's impossible.
We can stop here.
Maybe you could ask Stark if people could lean up against his wall.
Oh, well, to push it over? Yeah. This is one of these 1836 purchases that got this started as a family home for really just two families. I think this has really had, seriously, 3 owners in all the years since 1826. The Paddock family, the Easton family, and then Sterling College. You're going to find out that Sterling is connected with every single one of the 4 buildings we're going to see here. So, but again, we're going to go back and start at the beginning. The Crafts family genealogy is pretty complicated, and there, of course, was a son and 2 daughters of Ebenezer. One of those offshoots became the Paddock family. Augusta, the youngest of the 2, married a doctor from back home down in Massachusetts, and so she became a Paddock. Unfortunately, he didn't live very long, and so for the rest of her life, she worked her way down this road, picking up another husband. I'll say more about that at the end. But the second one is responsible for this, and there's a beautiful photograph of the Paddock family as it was.
Picnicking, right?
They got trees, or monstrous trees, and they're out there on a little picnic, and you have a husband, you have your wife, and you have 3 girls, all pictured here in this little family picture. And it makes you think, oh, how nice. They must have had a wonderful time living in Canada. Well, they did until the 5th of September, 1884, and one of our favorite diaries has that pinpointed as the day that he just heard that little Freddie Paddock, the only boy of the family, 3 years old, was over at the store of Augustus Paddock, who was a veteran of the Civil War and never went anywhere but here to there, save for 3 years in Virginia during the Civil War. But anyway, he had a business, and he was responsible for little Freddie. And Freddie got into some dried raisins, and it's hard to believe, but he consumed too many at one time, and maybe went down the wrong pipe. He choked to death, convulsed and choked to death as a 3-year-old. And it was tough, obviously, on the family. And then we have one thing that I pulled out, a little handwritten, typed, "This is my life," of the mother of little Freddie and her reaction to the tragedy. It is, I mean, she goes off to the orchard, wherever that was, pitches a tent, and refuses to see anybody for weeks. The girls, his sisters, recall looking up into the sky and seeing the image of little Freddie. They didn't dare look into the air there for fear of seeing Freddie and getting all upset about it. And it bodes bad for the mental health of the mother. And, let's see.
That was coming pretty quickly.
So the Sterling people call it the Raisin Boy. And, some of them at least know the story about the Raisin Boy dying over there in a Sterling building. And
That was Paradise, right?
that's Paradise. And we're still wondering why it's called Paradise.
Yeah.
By the way. It's just puzzling, you know. But of course, you're looking at a Henry Stevens construction right here. We kept a lot of our historical records early on. Some of them were in this building for many, many years. And we found some more about the Clapp and that family in digging through it. Let's see. Institutions, I'm going to go on. Just strangely enough, that same Paddock clan, by the way, there are a lot of them in this cemetery, and there is at least one suicide. But because there were two branches of the Crafts family, you sort of had a little bit of, I'm a Paddock, or you're a Dustin. Paddock or Dustin, Paddock or Dustin. Line up over here if you're a Paddock. And it definitely happened that nobody was out punching each other around. But one of the names for this woman that I mentioned who had such a hard time with the loss of his son, she was called Aunt Molly Cuckoo. So people knew that she wasn't quite there anyway. But Aunt Molly Cuckoo, she had kids, and the last Paddock that we ever saw here is buried in the far back right corner as you look at that. And one of them, at least, unfortunately, the only son in what was once the Paddock family after a couple of husbands. He, in 1930 something or other, as a young lad with a job with one of the government agencies, and it was in history and all. He got his father's shotgun and killed himself over in St. Johnsbury area there. And that didn't help anybody's frame of mind either. So they were a tough luck family. The last Paddock had diabetes, and she went blind, and she was at least able to get some auctions of Kraft's Paddock things, and we owe her a debt of gratitude. She never saw them. But at 3 different auctions over the years, Sterling was able to, with the help of friends, some of them local, find things in the listings of the Crafts family, Paddock included, and were able to purchase them. And there are a lot of them over there in the Historical Society there that we owe that debt of gratitude. Now, backing up a little bit, one of the sisters of David, who died, worked at UVM, and if you've ever read about George Washington Henderson, probably the best known little write-up was done by Margaret Hazen Muller, a Paddock. And in fact, she wrote a beautiful synopsis of him. Since then, unfortunately, there are a few facts that don't jive, and we almost had another historical marker, if you can believe it, in its most logical place had been pretty darn close to where the other one is, because George Washington Henderson, he's not buried here, but his wife, a white local woman, and their only child are all buried over here. But the origin of him getting to Vermont and who sponsored that, she almost got it right, but now there's probably a historical marker somewhere up here further north. I haven't been up to see if it's really there.
And what happened to his son?
The son died of tuberculosis.
When he was young.
Yeah, unfortunately, again, it was
His only son died.
the only child he had with his wife was a boy, and she died first, and a couple months later, the child died.
Oh, dear.
So George had his own problems, but
Dave, does that,
he remarried.
Yeah, it is.
What?
I'm sorry, I'm wondering if that write-up exists still? Do you have it?
Write-up of.
Of
book?
George Washington Henderson done by the Paddock
Oh
woman?
yes.
Is that the UVM one?
Yeah. Yes, that's the
Henry,
UVM.
you have one right up, right?
You.
Yeah,
Probably.
maybe that is the one
That's
that
Margaret Hazen Muller's.
Yeah,
Aside from little bits and pieces, hers is the only one. But we have quite a file on Henderson.
great.
And was quite the man. And lived at age 90, buried in Ohio. I love those things. Our road's got a lot of.
Stevenson, what business? Stevenson?
Stevens?
Yeah, what business? You said he was in business. I never.
Well, he was the local caretaker, undertaker.
Oh, okay.
Okay, he made furniture. He made fine furniture,
Okay.
and one of them, of course, was very much involved in town record keeping in the form of being a town clerk
Okay.
and the treasurer. Was started. There's probably a few things I missed. When the Stevenses stopped taking pictures, I really don't know, and it's frustrating because you don't know. You got the first guy, he does all the glass plate negatives. He dies. Did Henry come here and start, writing his little moniker on all the CDVs and things that we've got here? I don't know the answer to it. But his efforts to build, business around here is pretty impressive. But they eventually sold to someone else. And here, Simpson Hall, before Sterling, we had an Easton family. Doc Easton was a very well-known and loved local doctor here. He had 4 boys, one of which was his. The others were from a former wife. He had 1 daughter. And I think some of you might remember Penelope Easton, the woman.
Yeah.
Penelope came and gave a talked about the book that she'd written of her experiences basically after leaving here.
In Alaska.
In Alaska and all. But the one you really want to read is the one by Charles. I don't have a copy of it. It's all about living in Craftsbury. I mean, they came in the late teens, 19 something or other, and they stayed right up until about 1963. They had ownership, and I think Sterling bought it somewhere around there. But it's a wonderful book. There's no book that I know of that is richer in place names and old roads and families around here and all the things that people did as, in many cases, a young boy, and all the adventures they had, and it's really great.
And we have copies at the library and at the Historical Society.
Right.
And what is the name of it?
As
I remember.
I remember, thank you.
Here.
Yeah, I think it's As I Remember.
Yeah.
As I remember.
He had a lot of help from his daughter. I'm trying to think of her name, and I'm losing that. But as he collected material for the book, he came to the Historical Society, and we helped him out with a lot of maps and cross-checked things like that. The book got published, and of course there are copies still available for sale. But if there's anything I think you ought to read, if you're just curious about life back in the 20s and 30s and into the early 40s, that's the one to look at. The Tragedy. My copy has a note from his daughter thanking us. And 2 years after the book was published in 1999, her son blew her away with a shotgun and almost killed the husband also. And there's, I won't go into a lot of details, but it was a real tragedy. She didn't deserve that. There were extenuating circumstances, and again, if you want to